Okay, now that you have your organizer on your paper, we can use our watercolors. So make sure you have a water cup and your two brushes and your clean paint palette. If it's not clean yet, do that before anything else, right? You want your colors to be clear and not tainted, and then your palette to be clean. So we're going to use our bigger brush, and we're going to start with the wet on dry. So what that means is the paper is dry and the paintbrush is wet with paint on it. So we're going to start, I'll just use blue, swish my brush around a little bit, make sure there's enough water in there. If it's not getting paint on the brush, that means you don't have enough water on your brush. So mine was good, so I'm going to continue going with that. So just fill in this square. And obviously this paper is not going to be as resilient against the water because it's not thicker like the watercolor paper is. After you fill in that box, very simple, right? You're not doing anything special. You're going to rinse your brush completely. Make sure that it has no pigment in it, no paint. And then you're going to use water from your water cup. Even though it's tinted blue, it won't be so dirty on your paper. You're going to fill in this box with just water. Okay, so now it's wet. Now we're going to take our wet paintbrush with pigment, and I'll use green. And now I'm going to do the same thing that I just did, but it's on wet paper now. So you'll see it acts a little bit differently. Paper is going to be a little bit wrinkly as you do this. That's okay. So it looks almost the same, but it performs differently as you're doing it, and I'm sure you'll notice that difference. Now this one is a fun one. You're going to get the clean your brush and get the square wet again. Fill it with water. You don't want to drench it, just get it damp. And then you're going to, let's do red this time. Get some red on your brush, get a lot of it, or any color you choose. And you're just going to dab the square. And you can do another color. We'll do orange, a lot of orange, right? And so what this does is, you know, the paint spreads out on its own on that wet surface. And now I'll use yellow. And it's fun to mix them around. I'll use a little bit of blue, not to mix it with the orange though. And now if I just take my brush, I dry it off a little bit, I can pull out some of the color. If it's too dark or if I want to spread it out a little bit more, I can pull that out with a dry brush. I can rinse it, dry it off a little bit. If I don't want my orange and blue to touch, I can pull out, you know, pull them in a different direction. Spread them out a little bit. If it's a little bit too thick, I can take some out, make it a little bit lighter. That's what I love about watercolor. It's so versatile, and you can play around with it a lot. Okay. The next square is just a dry brush. So what you want to do is dry your brush off, hence the name, and dip it in. We'll do orange, and you're going to dip it in your paint since it's already wet, and wipe it off a little bit. Wipe it on your paper towel a little bit, and you're going to start from the bottom of your square and pull up and kind of flick your brush up. So my brush isn't super dry, but what this does is it uses the brush bristles and it gives your paint some texture, right? So you can glide across the paper like that. You can flick up, but using that dry brush you'll utilize the texture of the bristles to create texture on your painting. To make a hard edge, if you're making a shape, if you're making your foreground and it's very distinct from your middle ground, there's a hard edge. We're going to make a circle, and then we're going to come back to this one later. So we'll do red. I'm just going to make a circle, right? Wet brush on dry paper, and we will come back to this one later. Okay, so just make a circle. Then you're going to make the same circle, I'll do red again, on the next square, and then we're going to make a softer edge, right? If you have a shape or something and you want it to blur into the next thing, we'll do purple. I'm going to draw purple around, dry my brush off a little bit, draw purple around my circle, and you'll see how the edges become blurred, right? The colors blend together. And you can fill that square in if you want. Okay, so it's a very soft shape. Looks like I have a little bit of hair in my painting. And again, practice like drying your brush off, pulling some of that color out, right? If you press, you're kind of like sopping it up on your paper. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is the value scale. I'm going to move this up and over. And I will use blue again. And I'm going to start, we're going to do wet on dry. And I'm going to start with my darkest value here. I'm going to get my brush really soaked with blue. Cover that in blue. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off a little bit of blue. And I'm going to paint the next one a little bit darker. It's lighter than this one, but I'm going to add a little bit more to make it darker. Okay, and so the goal is to decrease the value so that it becomes lighter as we go over. Then you can add a little bit of water, do the next one. A little bit of water, wipe it off, do the next one. And finally, rinse your brush a little bit and do the last one. Okay, so we have kind of this even gradation. You can go back. I'm doing this really quickly, but okay. Then on your bottom rectangles, we have one color gradation. So instead of doing it in squares, we're going to do it evenly. I'll do green. Start with the dark value of that green and just keep moving it down. And as you can add a little bit of water, wipe your brush off, and keep going. As you go down, that paint will start to run out, and your gradient will become lighter. And every time I dip my brush in my cup, I'm wiping it off on the side of my cup so that it's not drenched in water. You never want to, unless you're using a really drenched brush, you don't typically want a sopping wet brush. Okay. And again, you can pull some of that out if you want. Notice how I'm never jamming my brush into my paper and pressing really hard. And because this is regular paper, it's the wrinkles kind of catch puddles of this paint. So on watercolor paper, it won't act this way. Now we're going to do a 2-color gradation. We'll do purple and red again. That came out really nice. So we'll start with red. Move it down. Add a little bit of water. And then start from the other side with purple with a clean brush. Yeah, this paint is acting very strangely on this paper, but at least you're getting some experience. And then water between the two will allow them to blend. Okay. Now for the sphere, You're going to look at where the shadow is, so your core shadow on your sphere will be on the right side. So we will do blue again. Actually, we'll do orange. And as you get closer to the highlight, it will dilute and become lighter. And then we'll go over this again. And then our shadow is going to be just orange. Dry your brush, add orange pigment to it. Okay, so this is not going to turn out perfect. You can see this is getting a little wonky over here. Your paper has a lot to do with the success of your painting, so try not to use this paper for your final painting. This is just for practice. And now we're going to go back to the hard edge, and we'll do green because it's very different. It's the opposite of red, complementary color. Hopefully this is dry. Yeah, it looks dry. And you're going to outline the red circle. And you see that the colors are not blending because we have dry paint with wet paint. Although sometimes if you get the dry paint wet enough on the paper, it will come up a little bit. And so you can experiment with that. But here we go. Here's your practice. And good luck. Then we'll move on to doing some fun stuff with the watercolor.